The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Andre walked home from his job at Mr. Parker's corner store. His backpack felt heavy against his shoulders, filled with school books and the lunch container his mom had packed that morning. At 14 years old, Andre was already learning the value of hard work, putting in a few hours after school to help his family make ends meet. Today, he decided to take the shortcut through Oak Ridge, the part of town where big houses sat behind fancy gates and people drove cars that cost more than his mom made in a year. Andre didn't usually walk this way. His mom had told him rich folks sometimes got nervous seeing kids from their side of town wandering through, but he was tired, and this route would get him home 15 minutes faster. The streets in Oak Ridge were clean and quiet, lined with tall trees that cast long shadows across the perfectly maintained lawns. Andre walked with his head down, keeping to himself, when the sound of someone muttering caught his attention. Looking up, he spotted a shiny black Bentley pulled over to the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking steadily. A man stood beside the car, dressed in an expensive-looking gray suit that was now smudged with dirt. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that made Andre think he was somebody important. The man was staring at the flat tire on his car like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Andre hesitated. His mom had always told him to be extra careful in neighborhoods like this. "Keep walking, mind your business," she'd say. But something about the man's frustrated expression made Andre stop. The guy looked completely lost, holding a tire iron like he'd never seen one before. "You need some help, sir?" Andre called out, keeping a respectful distance. The man turned, looking surprised to see someone else on the quiet street. His eyes took in Andre's worn sneakers, jeans, and the faded school logo on his t-shirt. "Oh, hello there," the man said, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "I seem to be having some trouble with this tire. Embarrassing, really. I haven't changed one myself in about 30 years. Andre took a few steps closer. "I can help if you want. My uncle taught me how when I was 10. The man looked relieved but hesitant. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," Andre said with a shrug. "I've done this plenty of times." The man smiled and extended his hand. "I'm Richard, Andre," he replied, shaking the man's hand. It felt weird. Andre wasn't used to adults treating him like an equal. Richard stepped back as Andre set his backpack down and got to work. The tools in the Bentley's trunk were still wrapped in their original packaging, clearly never used before. Andre carefully organized them on the ground. "Do you mind if I ask where you learned to do this?" Richard asked, watching as Andre loosened the lug nuts with confident movements. "My Uncle Joe. He runs a garage over in Westside," Andre explained, working the jack to lift the car. "He says everyone should know how to change a tire, jump a battery, and check their oil." "Basic stuff," Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Your uncle sounds like a wise man. Those are practical skills. I'm afraid I've relied on other people to solve my problems for too long." As Andre worked, he couldn't help admiring the car. "This is a Continental GT, right?" "V8 engine?" Richard raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. "Why, yes, it is." "You know cars?" Andre smiled as he removed the flat tire. "I read about them whenever I can. My uncle lets me look at his car magazines when I visit the garage. This model's got about 550 horsepower, right?" "That's exactly right," Richard said, now looking at Andre with genuine interest. "Most adults don't know that, let alone—" He stopped himself. "Let alone kids like me?" Andre finished, not offended. He was used to people underestimating him. Richard had the decency to look embarrassed. "I apologize. That was presumptuous of me." They fell into a comfortable conversation as Andre fitted the spare tire. Richard asked about school, and Andre told him about his interest in computers and engineering, how he was teaching himself coding from library books and free online courses when he could use the computers at school. "The teacher lets me stay after class sometimes to use the lab," Andre explained. "Our internet at home isn't great, and my little brother and sisters are usually watching videos on our shared tablet." Richard listened intently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that showed he was really paying attention. It felt good to talk about his dreams with someone who seemed to understand them. Most adults just nodded along when Andre talked about wanting to build things. "All done," Andre announced, tightening the last lug nut and lowering the car back to the ground. He wiped his hands on his jeans, leaving dark smudges on the denim. Richard stared at the newly mounted spare tire with genuine appreciation. "That would have taken me hours if I could have managed it at all." You've saved me a considerable amount of time and embarrassment. He reached for his wallet. Please let me give you something for your trouble. Andre shook his head. You don't have to do that, sir. I insist, Richard said firmly. I would have had to call roadside assistance and wait, not to mention pay them for something you just did in 20 minutes. Andre thought about the bus fare he needed for tomorrow and the fact that his little sister's birthday was coming up. He wanted to get her something nice. Still, it felt wrong somehow. Maybe just enough for bus fare, he suggested reluctantly. It's getting late and I should get home to help my mom with dinner. Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes as he handed Andre some money. More than just bus fare, but not so much that it felt like charity. You live far from here? Pinewood Heights, Andre replied, putting the tools back in the trunk. That's quite a walk, Richard commented, frowning slightly. Especially after working all afternoon, Andre shrugged. It's not so bad on days when the weather's nice. As they finished cleaning up, Richard reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a business card. It was simple but elegant, with just a name, phone number, and email address. This is my personal contact, Richard said, handing it to Andre. If you ever need anything, advice about computers, engineering, whatever it might be, please don't hesitate to call. I mean that sincerely. Andre took the card carefully, reading the name, Richard Harrington. The name didn't mean anything to him at the time. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, he said politely, tucking the card into his pocket. He figured he'd probably never use it, but it seemed rude to refuse. No thank you, Andre, Richard replied with genuine warmth. People rush past each other so often these days. It's refreshing to meet someone who still stops to help a stranger. As Andre gathered his backpack and prepared to continue his journey home, something made him turn back. Your spare tire is only good for about 50 miles, he called out. You should get a real replacement soon. Richard smiled. I'll do that. Take care, Andre. Andre waved goodbye and continued down the street, the business card sitting in his pocket like a small weight. He didn't know it then, but that simple card would soon become the key to changing his entire future. As he walked, the evening air growing cooler around him, Andre thought about the man and his fancy car. He wondered what it must be like to drive something like that, to wear suits that probably cost more than his mom's monthly rent. It wasn't jealousy he felt, just curiosity about a world so different from his own. By the time he reached the bus stop, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the horizon. Andre sat on the bench watching as the streetlights flickered to life one by one. He reached into his pocket and looked at the business card again. Richard Harrington. The name still meant nothing to him. He slipped the card into the zippered pocket of his backpack where it would stay safe. Not that he planned to use it. What would someone like him have to say to someone like Mr. Harrington? Still, it felt important somehow, like holding onto a rare coin or an unusual stone you find on the beach. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and a cloud of exhaust. Andre boarded, dropping his fare into the box, and found a seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from the curb, taking him back to his own neighborhood with its apartment buildings and corner stores, Andre couldn't have known that his life had already started to change, all because he'd stopped to help a stranger with a flat tire. 3 weeks passed since Andre's chance encounter with the man in his Bentley. Life had settled back into its familiar rhythm. School, work at Mr. Parker's store, helping at home, and squeezing in time to read about computers whenever he could. The business card remained tucked in the zippered pocket of his backpack, almost forgotten. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Andre sat in the back of his science class, trying to focus despite the steady drumming of water against the windows. His teacher, Mrs. Wilson, stood at the front with unusual excitement in her voice. I have an announcement that might interest some of you. Sure, said, holding up a colorful flyer. The State Engineering Association is hosting their annual Young Innovators competition. The grand prize is a full scholarship to any state university with an engineering program. Andre sat up straighter, suddenly alert. A full scholarship? That was the kind of opportunity that changed lives, the kind that could turn his dreams of becoming an engineer from wishful thinking into something real. The deadline for registration is in 2 weeks, Mrs. Wilson continued. You'll need to submit a project proposal that solves a real-world problem using technology. I can help anyone who's interested. As the bell rang and students rushed out, Andre lingered behind. Mrs. Wilson, could I get more information about the competition? She smiled, handing him a packet. I was hoping you'd ask, Andre. You have a natural talent for this kind of thing. Walking home that afternoon, Andre read through the packet, his mind racing with possibilities. But reality soon crept in, dampening his excitement. The competition required materials he couldn't afford, mentorship he didn't have, and resources beyond what his school could provide. By the time he reached the apartment building where he lived with his mom and 3 younger siblings, doubt had replaced his initial enthusiasm. The apartment was quiet when he entered. His mom was still at work, and his siblings were at their after-school program. Andre spread the competition papers across the kitchen table, staring at them as if they might reveal some solution he hadn't thought of. His eyes fell on his backpack, and he remembered the business card. Richard Harrington. The man had said to call if he needed anything, but surely he hadn't meant something like this. Rich people said those kinds of things to be polite, not because they actually expected you to follow up. Still, as the week wore on and Andre's ideas for the competition grew more detailed, the business card seemed to call to him from its hiding place. What did he have to lose? The worst that could happen was that Mr. Harrington wouldn't remember him or wouldn't have time. Friday afternoon, Andre found himself at the public library, staring at one of the free-to-use computers. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he debated whether to look up Richard Harrington. Curiosity won out. The search results made Andre's jaw drop. Richard Harrington wasn't just some rich guy, he was the Richard Harrington, founder of Harrington Tech Solutions, one of the biggest technology companies in the country. The man Andre had helped change a tire was worth billions, not millions. Andre sat back in his chair, stunned. No wonder the man hadn't known how to change a tire. He probably had people to do everything for him. The idea of calling him now seemed even more impossible. Someone that important wouldn't have time for a kid from Pinewood Heights. He was about to close the browser when an article caught his eye. Harrington announces new STEM initiative for underprivileged youth. The article detailed Richard's commitment to helping kids from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue careers in technology. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't so crazy after all. That evening, after helping his siblings with homework and getting them to bed, Andre sat on the edge of his bed, the business card in one hand and his mom's old cell phone in the other. He had told his mom about the competition, but not about his connection to Richard Harrington. He didn't want to get her hopes up. Taking a deep breath, Andre dialed the number. 1 ring. 2 rings, 3. He was about to hang up when someone answered. Hello? The voice was unmistakably Richard's. Andre's heart hammered in his chest. Hello, Mr. Harrington. This is Andre. I helped you change your tire a few weeks ago? In Oak Ridge? There was a pause, and Andre braced himself for confusion or polite dismissal. Andre, of course I remember you. The warmth in Richard's voice was genuine. I was hoping you might call. How are you? Relief flooded through him. I'm good, sir. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. In fact, your call is perfect timing. I've been wanting to thank you properly. That spare tire advice you gave me saved me from being stranded again. The dealership said another 5 miles and I would have damaged the wheel rim. Andre smiled. Glad I could help, sir. So, what can I do for you, Andre? I meant it when I said to call if you needed anything. Andre hesitated, then decided to just be honest. There's this engineering competition at school. The prize is a full scholarship, and I really want to enter, but... He trailed off, not sure how to explain all the obstacles without sounding like he was asking for handouts. But you need some resources. Richard finished for him. Tell me about your project idea. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that. Andre explained his concept for a low-cost water filtration system that could be assembled from readily available materials. It was inspired by the broken water main that had left his neighborhood without clean water for nearly a week last summer. Richard listened, occasionally asking insightful questions that helped Andre refine his thoughts. There was no condescension in his tone, just genuine interest. This is a promising idea, Andre. Very promising indeed. Listen, I'd like to help you develop this further. Are you free this Saturday? You could come to my office and we could look at some similar systems. Maybe run some tests on your design. Andre could hardly believe what he was hearing. Your office? You mean at Harrington Tech? Richard chuckled. Yes, would that work for you? Yes, sir, Andre replied, trying to keep his voice down so he wouldn't wake his siblings. That would be amazing. They arranged the details, and after hanging up, Andre flopped back on his bed, staring at the ceiling in disbelief. He was going to Harrington Tech, to work with Richard Harrington himself. Saturday morning found Andre standing outside the gleaming glass tower of Harrington Tech Solutions, his project notes carefully organized in a folder, wearing the nicest clothes he owned, which wasn't saying much. He'd had to take 2 buses and walk 8 blocks to get here, but he'd left extra early to make sure he wouldn't be late. The security guard at the front desk looked at him skeptically until Andre mentioned Richard's name. A quick call later, and he was being escorted to the elevator. Top floor, the guard instructed. Mr. Harrington's office is at the end of the hall. The elevator ride gave Andre time to worry. What if his idea wasn't as good as Richard had seemed to think? What if he embarrassed himself? But when the doors opened and he saw Richard waiting for him with a friendly smile, some of his anxiety eased. Right on time, Richard said approvingly, "Come on in." Richard's office was impressive but not as intimidating as Andre had imagined. One wall was entirely glass, offering a stunning view of the city. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with technical manuals and biographies. A large desk occupied one corner, but Richard led Andre to a comfortable seating area with a coffee table. "I had some breakfast brought in," Richard said, gesturing to a spread of pastries, fruit, and juice. "I figured we might be here a while." Andre's stomach growled, reminding him that in his nervousness he'd skipped breakfast. "Thank you, sir." As they ate, Richard asked about school, about Andre's family, about his interest in engineering. There was something different about the way Richard listened, like he genuinely wanted to hear Andre's answers, not just making polite conversation. "You mentioned your uncle has a garage," Richard said. "Is that where your interest in mechanics started?" Andre nodded. "Uncle Joe showed me how things work. But I got interested in computers when our school got a new lab 3 years ago. The teacher let me stay after school sometimes to use them." "And what do you want to do with these interests? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? It was a question adults often asked, but coming from Richard, it felt like he really wanted to know. "I want to build things that help people," Andre said simply. "Things that solve real problems like this water filter. Maybe someday start my own company like you did." Richard smiled, a hint of something like recognition in his eyes. "That's a good answer. Now let's take a look at your project plans." The rest of the morning flew by. Richard didn't just offer advice. He worked alongside Andre, treating him like a colleague rather than a child. By lunchtime, they had refined the design, identified potential materials, and even sketched out a testing protocol. "I think we've made excellent progress," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "What do you think about making this a regular thing? You could come in on Saturdays and we could work on your project together. I might be able to arrange for some of our engineers to help too." Andre could hardly believe his ears. "You'd do that for me?" Richard's expression grew serious. "Andre, talent like yours deserves to be nurtured. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm enjoying this. It reminds me of why I got into this field in the first place." As Andre left Harrington Tower that afternoon, project folder now filled with detailed notes and diagrams, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just the wishful thinking kind, but the solid, substantial kind that comes from knowing you have a real shot at something better. The business card that had sat forgotten in his backpack for weeks had just changed everything. Andre didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed changed Andre's life in ways he never could have imagined. Every Saturday morning, he would make the long journey to Harrington Tower where Richard would be waiting. Sometimes they worked in Richard's office, sometimes in one of the company's well-equipped labs. Occasionally, Richard would bring in other engineers to help with specific aspects of the water filtration project. But the most surprising change wasn't the access to Harrington Tech's resources, it was the relationship forming between Andre and Richard. What had started as simple mentorship was evolving into something deeper. Built on mutual respect and genuine connection. "You remind me of myself at your age," Richard told Andre one Saturday as they tested different filter materials. "Eager to learn, full of ideas, determined to make something of yourself despite the obstacles." Andre looked up from the microscope he was using. "You had obstacles?" "I thought," Richard smiled wryly, "that I was born with a silver spoon? Not quite. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. I got my first computer because I fixed the school librarian's car, and she gave me her old one as payment. This revelation shifted something in Andre's perception. He'd assumed Richard couldn't relate to his struggles, but maybe the gap between their worlds wasn't as wide as he'd thought. How did you end up here then, with all this? Andre gestured around the lab. Richard leaned against the counter. Hard work, some good ideas, and a lot of luck. Plus one person who believed in me when no one else did, my high school science teacher. He was the one who convinced me to apply for a scholarship I was sure I couldn't get. He looked at Andre thoughtfully. Everyone needs that one person who sees their potential. As the competition deadline approached, Andre's project was taking impressive shape. The water filtration system he'd designed was not only effective, but also remarkably affordable to produce, exactly what he'd set out to achieve. But his success at Harrington Tower came with a price. Between school, his job at Mr. Parker's store, his responsibilities at home, and now the project, Andre was stretched thin. Most nights he'd fall into bed exhausted, only to wake up before dawn to finish homework he hadn't had time for the day before. On a particularly difficult Thursday, Andre arrived at Mr. Parker's store with dark circles under his eyes. He'd been up until 2 in the morning working on calculations for the project, only to realize he'd forgotten to study for a history test. "You all right, son?" Mr. Parker asked, watching as Andre nearly dropped a box of inventory he was unpacking. "I'm fine," Andre replied automatically, though he felt anything but fine. Mr. Parker's weathered face creased with concern. "You've been working yourself to the bone lately. This have something to do with that competition your mama mentioned?" Andre nodded, too tired to elaborate. "Must be pretty important to you." "It could change everything," Andre said simply. "A full scholarship? That's the difference between maybe going to community college part-time while working, or actually becoming an engineer." Mr. Parker nodded slowly. "Dreams are worth the hard work. Just don't forget to take care of yourself along the way." He hesitated, then added, "If you need to cut back on hours for a while, we can work something out." Andre felt a rush of gratitude, quickly followed by worry. Those hours meant grocery money and help with the bills at home. "I can't afford to work less right now." "Then at least take tonight off." "You look dead on your feet." After some convincing, Andre agreed. Instead of working his usual Thursday shift, he went home early, intending to catch up on sleep before diving back into his project work. But when he arrived at the apartment, he found his mom in the kitchen looking stressed. "Andre, there you are," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I thought you were at work." "The school nurse called. Toby's running a fever and I have to pick him up. But I'm already late for my shift at the hospital and I can't find Mrs. Lewis to watch the girls." Andre's younger brother, Toby, was 8. His twin sisters, Lily and Rose, were 5. His mom worked as a nurse's aide and her job didn't offer much flexibility. "I'll get Toby and watch all 3 of them," Andre said without hesitation. "Go to work, Mom. We'll be fine." The grateful look on his mom's face made his decision worth it even as he mentally rearranged his plans for the evening. The project calculations would have to wait. 3 hours later, Andre sat on the couch with Toby asleep beside him, his fever finally down thanks to children's medicine. The twins were playing quietly on the floor, and Andre was trying and failing to stay awake enough to review his project notes. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "How are the flow rate calculations coming? Any problems?" Andre stared at the message, too tired to compose a response that wouldn't reveal how behind he was. Before he could reply, his phone rang, Richard calling. "Hello?" Andre answered, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Toby. "Andre? You sound strange. Is everything all right?" He thought about lying, about pretending everything was fine, but something in Richard's tone made Andre tell the truth. "Not really. My brother's sick and I'm watching him and my sisters while my mom's at work. I haven't had time to finish the calculations." There was a pause on the other end. "I see. Well, the calculations can wait. How's your brother doing?" The simple question, so different from the reaction Andre had feared, loosened something in his chest. "Better. His fever's down. He's sleeping now." "Good. That's what matters." Richard's voice was warm with understanding. "Family comes first, Andre. Always." They talked for a few more minutes, with Richard asking about Andre's siblings and sharing a story about his own brother. By the time they hung up, Andre felt lighter somehow. the weight of his many responsibilities momentarily less crushing. The next morning, a surprising text arrived from Richard. Taking the day off. I'll pick you up at 10. We can work at your place so you can keep an eye on your brother. At precisely 10 a.m., a sleek black car, not the Bentley this time, but a more modest sedan, pulled up outside Andre's apartment building. Richard emerged wearing jeans and a casual shirt, looking very different from his usual suited self. He carried a laptop bag and what appeared to be a small cooler. I thought your family might appreciate some soup, he explained when Andre met him at the entrance, nodding to the cooler. My housekeeper makes the best chicken soup in the state. It's what she always made when I was sick as a kid. Andre led Richard up the 4 flights of stairs to their apartment, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint in the hallway, the temperamental elevator that had been under repair for months, the general shabbiness of the building compared to Harrington Tower. Sorry about the stairs, Andre said as they reached his floor. Richard, slightly winded, waved off the apology. Good exercise, though I should probably get more of it regularly as my doctor keeps telling me. Inside the apartment, Andre made quick introductions. Toby, feeling better but still confined to the couch, was wide-eyed at meeting a real-life computer company boss. The twins were initially shy, hiding behind Andre until Richard produced 2 small chocolate bars from his pocket. If it's okay with your brother, he added, looking to Andre for permission. Andre's mom had left for her day shift at the hospital hours ago after a night of minimal sleep. The apartment was tidier than usual. Andre had rushed around cleaning before Richard arrived, but it was still undeniably small and crowded for a family of 5. If Richard noticed or cared about their modest circumstances, he gave no indication. He set up his laptop at the kitchen table, put the soup in the refrigerator with clear instructions for reheating, and then got right to work with Andre on the project calculations. They worked through the morning, taking breaks when the kids needed attention. Richard was surprisingly good with children, listening patiently to Toby's detailed explanation of his favorite video game and admiring the twins' crayon drawings with genuine interest. During a moment when all 3 children were occupied with a movie, Richard turned to Andre with a serious expression. You know, you're doing something remarkable here, balancing school, work, family responsibilities, and this project. Most adults would struggle with half of what you're managing. Andre shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I don't have much choice. That's not true, Richard countered gently. You could have given up on the project. You could have decided it was too much. But you didn't. That says something about who you are. By late afternoon, they had completed not only the calculations, but also several other aspects of the project that had been troubling Andre. As Richard packed up his laptop, he paused. I've been thinking, he said carefully. This project is important and you're putting everything you have into it. I don't want you burning yourself out trying to manage everything alone. What would you think about me setting up a small stipend for you, to make up for the hours you might need to reduce at Mr. Parker's store? Andre stiffened. I don't want charity. Richard nodded as if he'd expected this response. It's not charity. Think of it as an investment in a promising young engineer. Or better yet, consider it an internship. You're doing real work on a project with significant potential. Why shouldn't you be compensated for that? The way Richard framed it made Andre reconsider. It wasn't a handout. It was recognition of his work and his potential. I'll think about it, Andre said finally. As Richard left, promising to see Andre at their regular Saturday session, he paused at the door. You're going to win that competition, Andre. Not because of my help, but because you've got something special. The world needs more problem solvers like you. Long after Richard had gone, his words stayed with Andre. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly believe that he might win, that his future could be different from what he'd always assumed it would be. The water filtration project wasn't just about a scholarship anymore. It was about proving to himself and maybe to the world that where you came from didn't have to determine where you were going. The night before the competition, Andre sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by parts of his water filtration prototype. Everything had been working perfectly during testing at Harrington Tech, but now, when he needed it most, the system was failing. Dirty water went in and dirty water came out. The filtration element wasn't working, and Andre couldn't figure out why. He checked his watch. 11:37 p.m. The competition started at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Panic rose in his chest as he disassembled the filter unit for the third time, checking every connection, every seal, every component. Nothing seemed out of place, yet it wasn't working. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. "It's late. You should sleep?" She was right, but how could he sleep when months of work was falling apart at the last minute? Andre had already accepted Richard's internship offer, cutting back hours at Mr. Parker's store to focus on the project. His family was counting on him. Richard believed in him. He couldn't fail now. After another hour of fruitless troubleshooting, desperation won out. Andre dialed Richard's number, even though it was now past midnight. He almost hung up after the first ring, embarrassed to be calling so late, but Richard answered before he could. "Andre, what's wrong?" Richard's voice was alert despite the hour. "The filter's not working." Andre's voice cracked slightly. "I've checked everything. I don't know what's happening. I'm sorry for calling so late, but the competition's tomorrow and I—" "Take a deep breath," Richard interrupted calmly. "Now tell me exactly what's happening." Andre explained the problem as clearly as his tired mind would allow. Richard asked several precise questions, guiding Andre's thinking. "It sounds like the pressure might be too low," Richard concluded. "The membranes need a minimum pressure to function properly." "But it worked fine in the lab," Andre protested. "Different water pressure in your building, perhaps?" Richard suggested. "Listen, this is fixable. I'm coming over. Now?" "But it's almost 1 a.m. The competition's in 8 hours. We don't have time to waste." Before Andre could argue further, Richard had hung up. 45 minutes later, a soft knock at the apartment door announced his arrival. Andre opened it to find Richard still dressed in what looked like the same clothes from earlier that day, carrying a small toolbox and a bag from an all-night convenience store. "I brought some supplies," he whispered, mindful of the sleeping family members, "and energy drinks. I figured we'd need them." They sat up at the kitchen table, Richard examining the filter while Andre explained what he'd already tried. Richard's hands moved with surprising dexterity for a man who claimed he couldn't change a tire 3 months ago. "Here's our problem," Richard said finally, pointing to a tiny crack in one of the connectors. "Water's escaping before it can build up enough pressure to push through the filter media. No wonder it worked in the lab. We were using the pressurized system there." Andre stared at the crack, so small he'd missed it completely. "Can we fix it?" Richard opened his toolbox. "Always. That's the first rule of engineering. There's always a solution." They worked side by side in the quiet kitchen, the only sounds the occasional clink of tools and the hum of the refrigerator. Richard showed Andre how to create a temporary seal using materials from the convenience store. Not a perfect fix, but enough to get through the competition. As they reassembled the filter, Richard asked quietly, "Nervous about tomorrow?" Andre nodded, focusing on tightening a connection. "What if it doesn't work? What if I freeze up during the presentation?" "You won't. How can you be so sure?" Richard put down his screwdriver and waited until Andre looked up at him. "Because I've seen how you handle pressure. That first day we met, you didn't hesitate to help a stranger with a flat tire. When your brother was sick, you stepped up without complaint. When this filter broke, you didn't give up. You found a solution. That's who you are, Andre." Something in Richard's unwavering confidence steadied Andre's nerves. They finished the repair and tested the system. Clean water dripped from the output, not perfect but functional. By the time they packed everything up, it was nearly 4 a.m. "You should try to get some sleep," Richard said, stifling a yawn himself. "I'll pick you up at 8. "You don't have to do that," Andre protested weakly, exhaustion catching up with him. Richard smiled. "I know I don't have to, I want to. That's another thing about engineering, Andre. No great invention was ever created by just one person working alone." Morning came too quickly. Andre managed about 3 hours of fitful sleep before his alarm jolted him awake. His mom had already left for her early shift, but she'd left a note on the kitchen table. "Good luck today. We believe in you." Andre's hands shook slightly as he carefully packed his project into the box Richard had provided, a specially designed case that would protect it during transport. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Outside when you're ready." The competition was held at the State University's engineering building, a massive structure of glass and steel that intimidated Andre as soon as he saw it. Dozens of students from schools across the state were setting up projects, many with fancy displays and professional-looking presentations. "Wow," Andre murmured as they walked in. "I didn't realize it would be this big." Richard nodded. 37 schools participating this year. But remember, it's not about who has the flashiest display. The judges care about innovation, practicality, and impact. They found Andre's assigned table and began setting up. The temporary fix on the filter seemed to be holding, but Andre couldn't help checking it every few minutes, terrified it would fail during judging. "Stop fussing with it," Richard advised gently. "You'll make it worse. Trust the work we did." As other competitors continued arriving, Andre noticed something that hadn't occurred to him before. He was one of only a handful of black students in the room. Most of the others came from wealthy suburban schools with expensive-looking projects and teachers hovering nearby. "Do you think I really have a chance?" Andre asked quietly, doubt creeping in. Richard's gaze was steady. "I wouldn't have invested all this time if I didn't. Your project solves a real problem that affects real people. That matters more than fancy packaging." The judges began making their rounds shortly after 9. Andre watched anxiously as they moved from table to table, asking questions, taking notes, sometimes shaking their heads or nodding approvingly. When they finally reached Andre's table, his heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The lead judge, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair, examined his project with an unreadable expression. "Walk us through your design, please," she instructed. Andre took a deep breath, remembering all the practice sessions with Richard, and began his explanation. To his surprise, once he started talking about the filtration system, his nervousness faded. This was something he knew inside and out, something he cared about deeply. He explained how the system used locally available materials, how it could be assembled with basic tools, how it removed contaminants while preserving essential minerals. He demonstrated how it worked, relief flooding through him when clean water dripped steadily from the output. "What inspired this project?" another judge asked. Andre told them about the water main break in his neighborhood last summer, how families had struggled to find clean water, how some couldn't afford bottled water and had gotten sick. "I wanted to create something that could help in emergencies, but also something that communities without reliable clean water could build themselves," he concluded. "Something affordable and practical." The judges asked several more technical questions, which Andre answered confidently. When they finally moved on to the next table, Richard gave him a subtle thumbs up. "You nailed it," he whispered. The waiting was torture. After all the projects had been judged, participants and visitors milled around the exhibition hall, while the judges deliberated. Andre's mom had a ved during his presentation, bringing Toby and the twins, who were now fascinated by the other projects. Mr. Parker had closed the store for an hour to come support Andre. The unexpected show of support from his family and employer touched Andre deeply. When the announcement finally came that the judges had reached their decision, Andre's legs felt weak. Everyone gathered near the main stage where a university official stood with a microphone. "Before we announce the winners, I want to thank all of our participants," the official began. "The quality of projects this year has been exceptional." Andre barely heard the rest of the speech, his pulse pounding in his ears. Richard stood beside him, a steady presence amidst his anxiety. The third-place winner was announced, a project about solar energy storage. Then second place, a sophisticated robot designed to help elderly people. Andre's hope began to fade. Those projects were amazing, way more advanced than his simple water filter. And the first-place winner of this year's Young Innovators competition? The official paused dramatically. For a project that combines elegant simplicity with profound real-world impact. Andre Thompson, for his low-cost emergency water filtration system. The world seemed to stop. Andre stood frozen until Richard nudged him forward. Somehow he made it to the stage, accepted the certificate and medal they handed him, and even managed to thank the judges without his voice shaking too much. From the stage, he could see his family cheering, Toby jumping up and down, the twins clapping wildly, his mom wiping tears from her eyes. Mr. Parker was grinning broadly, and Richard stood a bit apart from them, his expression one of quiet pride, as if he'd always known this moment would come. In that instant, surrounded by applause, Andre realized that the scholarship, as life-changing as it would be, wasn't the most valuable thing he'd gained. What mattered more was discovering his own capabilities and finding people who believed in him enough to help him see them too. 5 years passed like the turning of pages in a well-loved book. The day Andre won the engineering competition marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. But it wasn't the end of his story. Far from it. The scholarship that had once seemed like an impossible dream carried Andre through 4 years at the State University's engineering program. The path wasn't always easy, college level. Calculus nearly broke him during his first semester, but the foundation built during those long Saturdays with Richard prepared him better than he'd realized. On graduation day, Andre stood tall in his cap and gown, scanning the crowd until he found the faces he was looking for. His mom sat in the front row, dressed in her Sunday best, beaming with a pride so fierce it was almost tangible. Beside her sat Toby, now a teenager himself with dreams of becoming a doctor, and the twins, no longer little girls but young ladies of 10, both already showing the same determination that ran in the family. And there was Richard, seated with Andre's family as naturally as if he belonged there, which, in many ways, he did. Over the years, what had begun as mentorship had evolved into something deeper. Richard had become a fixture at family dinners, holiday celebrations, and school events. He was the person Andre called first when he aced a difficult exam or hit a roadblock in a project. The bond between them transcended the differences in their backgrounds, their ages, their circumstances. After the ceremony, as families and graduates mingled on the sunlit campus lawn, Richard pulled Andre aside. "I have something for you," he said. Handing over a small wrapped package, Andre opened it carefully. Inside was a sleek business card holder, made of polished wood with his name engraved in gold. "Turn it over," Richard instructed. On the back was a simple inscription. "To the future you're building." R.H. Andre ran his fingers over the engraving. "Thank you. For this and for everything." Richard waved away the gratitude with a smile. "I should be thanking you. Do you know how many board meetings I've escaped using you as an excuse? Sorry, can't make it Saturday, I'm mentoring a future engineering genius." They both laughed, but there was truth beneath the joke. Richard had confessed once, after a particularly productive Saturday session, that working with Andre had rekindled a passion for hands-on engineering that he'd lost somewhere along the way to becoming a CEO. "So," Richard said, his tone growing more serious, "have you made a decision about the job offers?" Andre nodded. He'd received several impressive offers from top engineering firms, including one from Harrington Tech Solutions with a starting salary that still made him dizzy when he thought about it. "I'm going with Davis & Chen," he said. It was a smaller firm, known for their work on environmental projects in underserved communities. Richard showed no disappointment that Andre hadn't chosen Harrington Tech. Instead, he nodded approvingly. "They'll be lucky to have you. Their community water systems project in particular seems right up your alley." "That's what caught my eye," Andre admitted. "They're doing the kind of work I've always wanted to do, practical solutions for real people." Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner with his family, Andre found himself sitting on the porch steps of their new house, a modest but comfortable home in a nice neighborhood, purchased with help from his mom's improved job situation. Richard had recommended her for a hospital administrative position 3 years ago, and her natural organizational skills had led to 2 promotions since then. Richard joined him on the steps, 2 glasses of sparkling cider in hand. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, passing 1 glass to Andre. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since that day I helped you with the flat tire." "Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences," Richard agreed. "Though I maintain that tire was criminally difficult to change," Andre smiled. "You've gotten better. That lesson last month wasn't half bad." After Richard had learned that Andre knew how to change a tire but had never learned to drive, his family hadn't owned a car, he'd insisted on teaching him, using his own Bentley for the lessons despite Andre's protests. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their cider and watching the fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. "I have something I want to discuss with you," Richard said finally. "A proposal of sorts." Andre raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious." "It is, in a way." Richard set down his glass. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something focused on identifying talented young people from underserved communities and giving them the resources to pursue careers in STEM fields. That sounds amazing, Andre said sincerely. I'd like you to help me build it, Richard continued. Not right away, you should focus on your new job first, get some experience under your belt. But eventually I'd like you to take a leadership role, maybe even run it someday. Andre stared at him, taken aback. Me? But I don't know anything about running a foundation. Neither did I until I started researching it. But you know something more important. You know what it's like to have the talent and drive but lack the resources and connections. Your perspective would be invaluable. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. Think about it. No pressure, no timeline, just consider it a possibility for the future. The idea took root in Andre's mind, growing stronger in the weeks that followed as he started his new job at Davis & Chen. The work was challenging and rewarding, focused on developing water systems for communities with limited infrastructure. His first major project took him to a rural area 3 hours from the city, where the water supply had been contaminated by agricultural runoff. Working with the local community, Andre was struck by how many bright, curious kids he met, kids who reminded him of himself not so long ago. One boy in particular, a 12-year-old named Dion with a knack for mechanics and a million questions about engineering, stuck in Andre's mind. On his drive back to the city, Andre found himself thinking about Richard's foundation idea. By the time he reached his apartment, he'd made up his mind. The next morning he called Richard. I've been thinking about your proposal, he said without preamble. And? Richard prompted. I want to help build it. Not just eventually. Now, while I'm still working at Davis & Chen, I can contribute ideas, help with planning. And when the time is right, I'll take a more active role. Richard's smile was audible in his voice. I was hoping you'd say that. How about dinner this weekend to discuss the details? 6 months later, the Harrington-Thompson Foundation for STEM Education became a reality. With initial funding from Richard and a mission statement co-written by Andre, the foundation would provide scholarships, mentorship, equipment, and enrichment programs to talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Their first initiative was a weekend engineering program, where professionals volunteered their time to work with promising middle and high school students. The pilot program launched at Andre's old high school, with Andre himself teaching the first session. Standing before a classroom of 20 students, including Dion from the rural community where he'd worked, Andre felt a momentary flash of doubt. What did he have to offer these kids, really? He was still figuring things out himself. Then he remembered how Richard had treated him from the beginning, not as a charity case, not as a child, but as a person with valuable ideas and untapped potential. That was what these kids needed too. Someone who saw their possibilities. Engineering isn't just about building things, Andre.